London, July 14th, 1917. General Tshirt had never faced this staggering quantity of paperwork in his entire life. His aide, Captain Barling, was scrambling desperately to try to sign and sort the ever-increasing pile of folders, files and documents. The door opened, both men groaning as Captain Balkadder walked into the room, an angry scowl on his face as he plopped yet another pile of paperwork on the floor. "God, I can't do this anymore!" Tshirt yelled out in anguish. "I know, sir. Soldier on. We can't stop now." "We honestly can't afford to," Barling said meekly from behind his mountain of papers. "It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen since someone pointed at something and said, 'That's bloody ridiculous,'" Balkadder said with an annoyed tone. "Oh, hello, Balkadder. How many more pallets of documents have we left?" Tshirt said. 41 pallets, including some gifts from the Garanians, the Romaroi, the Archadi, and a few, let's call them ritual sacrifices from the Wahandai. I pointed them all towards the canteen instead of the gas chamber. They weren't expecting it. Balkadder replied in annoyance. "How did we come to this?" Tshirt yelled out. "I mean, look at this. 27 notices of unconditional surrender, 37 notices of conditional surrender, 41 requests to become vassals, and even this. What's this one, Balkadder?" "It's a breeding request form, sir," he replied. "Indeed it is. This is absurd. I can't deal with this," Tshirt said. "Unfortunately, sir, it is our duty to sort through this stuff. Sort the unofficial stuff from the official stuff. Parliament is in a full closed panic session at the moment," Captain Barling said, as he finished one pile of papers. "What are the Americans up to? And the Russians?" Tshirt asked. "Well, near as I can tell, the Americans are taking full advantage of the situation and are changing their mascots. It's gone from eagles to a barnyard open house over there. They've already sent up a dozen more ambassadors, and the time is taken for this nonsense to start. As for the Russians, well, they're being Russian. Revolution is in full swing, and everyone who can speak to the aliens is being shot, so not much going there," Balkadder said. "So basically the same as usual. Well, at least that's helpful," Tshirt said. Two more men walked in, depositing yet more paperwork in the room. "Dowrich, George, how goes the sorting?" Balkadder said. "Going pretty well, sir. Got half the division trying to sort through it all," Doldrich's hefty Cockney accent said as he hefted some papers into a corner. "My God, this is exciting," George said, as he proudly puffed out his chest. "What's exciting about it exactly, George? Is it the concept that we as a species barely had the ability to manage our own nations, and suddenly we have an entire galaxy to care for? Or is it the mountain of paperwork we have to do instead of fighting a war? Speaking of, weren't we supposed to be doing that? Last I recall, Field Marshal Gage was still trying to move his drinks cabinet 6 inches closer to Berlin," Balkadder replied with annoyance. "Well, that's the excitement, sir. The war's been called off," George said. "Seriously?" Balkadder asked with a raised brow. "Oh, indubitably, Balkadder. As soon as we got first contact, the entire front line was effectively abandoned on all sides. Everybody just gave up and went home to hear what the aliens wanted to say," Barling replied as he handed some papers to Tshirt. "God. Well, at least that's over. Doubt we'll start that shit again. So now what? Should I grab a spade and start filling in the trench line again?" Balkadder asked. "We can let the engineering corps return no man's land to yes man's land, I suppose. We can sort that out when this mess is fixed," Tshirt said, gesturing to his paperwork. "Permission to speak, sir?" Dowdrich said. "Granted, Private, with all due sense of dread," Balkadder said. "So, I was thinking, right? A month ago there wasn't aliens everywhere, right? And now we does have aliens everywhere, right? And we was fighting, right? And now we isn't fighting, right? So what I want to know is, how do we get from one case of affairs to the other case of affairs?" Doldrich said. Everyone just stared at him for a minute. Do you mean, how did this all start? Bulkheader asked. Doldrus stared blankly for a moment, smiled and said, Yeah. Well, Doldrich, it happened because we live in a galaxy made of people that have a genetically crippling case of Ovinophobia. Bulkheader replied. Ovinophobia, sir? Sounds like someone's scared of ovals. Who would be scared of ovals? Now, cubes, that I can understand, George replied in earnest. Well, yes, I do say that cubes are rather terrifying, but ovals? Seems a bit Frenchy to me, Nelchet replied. No, that's O-V-I-N-O phobia, sir. It means one is scared of anything of the genus Ovis, Barling said. Genus Ovis sounds pretty scary, doesn't it? George replied. Sheep, you idiots! Sheep! The aliens are scared of sheep, Bulkheader said with an angry tone. Bulkheader leaned against a tower of paperwork near the wall. The aliens are scared of sheep? Of all things, sheep? Nelchet asked. Near as I can tell, in the far-flung history of the ancient galactic races, there lived a species called the Harvarris, Bulkheader said. Oh, a story. I love these, George said, as he and Doldrus settled into a spot to listen. Bulkheader took a deep, frustrated breath and began again. According to the information we have been able to get from our new vassal states, deep in the ancient history of the galaxy there lived a great scourge known as the Harvarris, a herbivorous race of creatures that dealt upon the galaxy great misery in the form of slavery, torture, military conquest, and blah blah blah. These creatures were apparently so adept at combat and military warfare, and so very good at the whole subjugation thing, they controlled a full quarter of the galaxy. Much like the British Empire as of now. So, they're like the Space British, only worse, Doldrus said. I guess you can say that, but we aren't quite as brutal. Sure, we shot people and nicked their countries, but at least we did it with dignity. Anyway, eventually some of the galaxy's less proficient denizens got really annoyed with the constant attacks, and formed a coalition in order to deal with them. It took them 1,000 years of traumatizing war to finally force the Harvarris into extinction, and release the galaxy from their influence. Only it didn't work, Bulkheader said. What do you mean, didn't work, Bulkheader? They won, didn't they? Nelchet said. Well, sort of. They got rid of the problem, but not the phantom they left behind. See, over 1,000 years of war, 1,000 years of military recruitment, 1,000 years of propaganda, and 1,000 years of trauma from invasions, it left a mark of the race's existence on their very soul. Like that boil on Doldrich's right cheek. That won't ever go away, no matter how much soap you use, Bulkheader said. That relates to our present mountain of paperwork, how? Nelchet asked. Simple. They had done themselves into this hatred of these enemies so deeply that it became a factor in the entire galaxy's collective genetic spectrum. In short, everyone got scared shitless into permanently hating sheep, Bulkheader replied. Well, that seems silly. What happened then? Barling asked. Well, sir, the rumor goes that a Vicarian scouting party was attempting to put in an infiltration team to do the usual things aliens apparently do. Unfortunately for them, they landed in Wales. Odd place to choose to perform any kind of infiltration mission, if you ask me, but that's where they were. Their first port of call was a sheep farm. They apparently panicked at the sight, retreated, and alerted the rest of the galaxy of some kind of threat, Bulkheader replied. Are you telling me what I think you are telling me? Barling asked, as he peered from behind his wall of papers. Well, let's see then. This scouting party went back to the galaxy and told everyone that their ancient enemy had returned, and several invasion fleets were sent to Earth. Only they didn't find their ancient enemy. They found a facsimile of the ancient enemy that humanity had apparently domesticated, to the point of using them as both a food and clothing source. The shock and ridiculousness of the situation broke their brains, Bulkheader said. Broke their brains how, sir? Doldrus asked, clearly still confused. Well, the Ovinophobia they developed as a result made them so completely scared shitless, they went in a near catatonic state when encountering a sheep of any kind. In short, the entire galaxy has a nearly lethal fear of anything mutton or wool. And the sight of us having no fear at all when near sheep freaked them out even more. It's like us with big spiders or elephants with mice. That's how terrified they are, Blackadder said. So let me get this straight, sir. Ancient aliens had killer sheep, and they hated those killer sheep so much that now when they even see something that resembles sheep, they get terrified to the point of silliness? George asked. Yes, precisely, George. Well done. You got one right for once. In essence, we, humanity, the silly bastards who were throwing 50,000 men into a meat grinder every week, have basically passed with flying colours, a contest of strength and bravery that we weren't even aware existed. And because we not only passed it, by being near sheep without dropping dead, and more importantly, in their eyes at least, domesticating them and turning them into pets, clothing and food, because we passed, we are now considered the most powerful force in the galaxy, purely because of the fact we aren't scared shitless at the mention of the word mutton, Blackadder said. So that is why, Blackadder, the last 3 weeks of work has been nothing but sorting surrender notices? Narrate asked with a crooked brow. Yes, sir, it is. The first contact with the aliens was an interesting circumstance, apparently, Barling replied. It was? Tell, Narrate said. Well, intelligence says the aliens attempted to place infiltration machines called drones in a barnyard and got the absolute piss scared out of them by a sheep that had wandered into the barn. The local farmer, a Welshman, came in and brought the sheep away. The aliens went into a full-on panic and the farmer, at least in their eyes, saved them from the sheep. As far as I remember, the farmer then fed the aliens, unknowingly apparently, mutton-based shepherd's pie. This traumatized the aliens as they were essentially eating the remnants of their ancient enemy. Panic ensued, and the aliens demanded their own surrender, Barling replied, as he shoveled another stack of paperwork onto his desk. That's what pisses me off about this whole thing the most, sir, Blackadder said. Oh? It isn't the fact that the war is suddenly and inexplicably over. It isn't that we suddenly became the controlling empire in a galaxy-wide state when we barely have the resources to manage our own world. It isn't the sudden burden of responsibility we are about to undertake. And it isn't the sudden, inexplicable change of global body politic that is about to happen. No. There's one part about this whole situation that pisses me off more than anything, Blackadder said with a sigh. What would that be, sir? Doldrich asked. It's the fact we now have to, whether we like it or not, we now have to actually acknowledge the Welsh, Blackadder replied with an angry growl. All the men thought about it for a second, sighed and said, bugger.